Baruch Hashem, you're a bad Jew.
Shalom.
You're listening to Bad Jew. With me today is Eyal Shay, all the way from Israel. Eyal, where are you calling from today in Israel?
Well, I'm about an hour north of Tel Aviv in a rural, part of Israel.
Okay.
But it's a small place, so Israel is good. It basically covers the whole thing.
Welcome to Virtual America. On this podcast, we do this very special challenge that is tradition for all the guests. It's a rite of entry. Kosha Dills did this. David Sachs did this. Saul Blinkoff did this. Aliza Klein did this. I'm going to have you do the same thing. It is the Bad Jew Challenge, where you are going to introduce yourself for 4 minutes and tell your entire life story. Do you think you're up for the challenge?
I'll do my best.
All right. Echad, shtaim, shalosh. Yalla.
All right. So my name is Eyal Shay. I was born in Israel. And I guess to put it in some context that's relevant to this show, interestingly enough, all four of my grandparents were born into religious homes, and all four of them left religion behind and made Aliyah as staunch Zionists to build kibbutzim in Israel. And so I was already born as a third generation to this kind of movement. And I already grew up in a completely secular home in a kibbutz, so borderline anti-religion, right? Or at least very far away from religion. So I can't tell you exactly when was the first time I entered the synagogue, but it was probably not until my mid-teenage years, I imagine. My bar mitzvah was a talent show with the kibbutz. So I sang All Together Now by the Beatles to people of the kibbutz. That was my bar mitzvah. And other people did like comedy sketches and whatever. So this is kind of my Jewish background or non-background. However, as time passed, I got more interested in, just because I'm interested in tons of stuff and basically every field of study on earth. So Judaism is no exception. I'm a licensed tour guide today. So as part of that, I had to study the theory behind Judaism and then, of course, visit every important site in Israel. And these sites I keep visiting on a regular basis today. So with time, I actually probably got educated to a point where I know quite a bit on Judaism, if not as an observing Jew. Yeah, I'm definitely interested in Israel as a whole, and obviously in the interplay of religions, of spirituality, which is a big aspect of this land slash state slash country, however you want to call it. So it's by great pleasure that I get to take people on tours who come here and really walk them through that. And my intention usually is to have them leave as confused as I am, because I know many things, right? So if you know a few things, you might think you know everything that there is to know about Israel. When you actually arrive here and you get into the small details, you realize that it's kind of infinite, and really nobody knows what the future holds for this tumultuous place in terms of politics, religion, demographic makeup, and these things. So are there any biographical aspects that didn't make it yet? Because I'm ahead of time.
Awesome, Eyal. This was great. You had 45 seconds remaining on the clock. You did a great job on that. And I think, some of the things that I'm kind of hearing that I find really fascinating. The first one is that I like that you said that you are an observing Jew versus an observant Jew. An observant Jew is someone who would, is pretty much synonymous with being religious, right? But you're saying an observing Jew in the sense that you grew up not religious, completely secular. Your bar mitzvah was a talent show. And I love that, by the way. And, what you're describing is the fact that from being able to teach about Israel, you naturally picked up a lot about Judaism in that time, from what I understood.
Mhm.
That's correct so far, right?
Yeah, I mean, just growing up here, you do have to take classes about certain things, but I don't know how much sticks during school, especially for me because I didn't stick around in school too much. I was always more of an autodidactic person. But yeah, it's just with time, I guess I just want to know things about the place I live in. So for me, a lot of it is learning about plants too, like the land, the rocks, the everything, but obviously being surrounded by so much different views and religions, like that was just natural for me to delve into that.
Of course. And like you just pointed out, there's multiple religions in Israel. Does that mean you also know a lot about Islam or Christianity or even, there's a lot of religions out there.
Yeah, I'm kind of a jack of all trades. So you won't see me saying that I am an authority or any of these because I know some amazing people who are really able to go into minute details of different religions and their sects. But I definitely know a lot more than just a layperson who just kind of lives around this part of the world. So yeah, in addition to Judaism, we have Islam, Christianity on all its sects, or at least more than a handful. The Druze religion, Alawite, Baha'i, and maybe even a few more minor ones. But yeah, it's really interesting to see all these, and in that sense, we're lucky to be in Israel and to have all of this around and meet people from these religions rather than just read about them. And
It's a beautiful mesh of multiple cultures within one Jewish state. It's the only place in the world like that. But we're not going to ask you today about Judaism. This is actually more so about individual people's responses. Today's episode is on why do some Jews hate Israel? That's something that probably comes up in your profession a lot as a tour guide. And I look forward to hearing why this comes up and hearing some insight on that and what some of the responses are that you have to certain issues that pop up. So, Eyal, why do some Jews hate Israel?
yeah, well, I will say I have a philosophy podcast of all things, and I'd love to actually have someone ever talk about hate on there, which it's an interesting concept. So even before we tackle the thing of why Jews hate Israel, like hate itself, I think stems always from just a perception that something embodies the wrong values for you, and not just in a way that you don't approve of, but you also it's probably has to do with fear too. For a lot of people, what they hate most, I think, is the kind of entity that embodies entity or person that embodies values that they disapprove of, and they themselves might also be bunched in the thing, right? Or
What do you mean by
bunched
that?
with the person.
Yeah, what do you
Hmm?
mean by that? I don't understand what do you mean by
S-
entity?
so I mean, I think that a lot of Jews, for example, would be very wary that by being Jewish, people would have prejudice against them as seeing them as pro-Israel. Now, if they disapprove of many things they see in Israel, they might react by overcompensating when it comes to like distancing themselves from Israel, right? And
Mhm.
then the road from there to being very vocal about how things are shitty there is kind of very short, I think. So that's hate in general, and yeah, I already got into the specifics a little bit, but basically, I think it also has to do with the fact that Israel is a side in a bloody conflict, and this is a messy kind of thing. I mean, and both sides here have blood on their hands, whether that's their intention or and nobody wants part of that. And I think, yeah, a lot of people would like to distance themselves from the warring, so from any of the warring sides or the warring side which they perceive to be more at fault or anything like that. So I think it's pretty much that, if that makes
So,
sense.
yeah, I think what's really fascinating about your answer is that you said both sides have blood on their hands, which means that both sides bear a certain amount of guilt for something that didn't go perfectly in, like you said, a messy conflict. it's true. The Israel-Palestine conflict, there's no straightforward timeline. You might be able to track specific events down. Well, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. But even beyond the text, even beyond what's black and white on a piece of paper, there are nuances that aren't really described well that kind of get lost in translation. Why do you think that happens, Eyal?
Yeah, first of all, it's just a fact, right? And I think that that will always happen when you have entities that are societies that are made up of individuals, and these individuals are not actually not one of them is actually acting as a representative of the whole population. So, yeah, I'll be the first to say that. And as I kind of said in the introduction, I like to have people over here and send them away with an understanding that their knowledge is incomplete, as is mine. So I think it happens because, well, to answer your question, I think this tendency to eventually always come up short when it comes to a wholesome understanding of something, or missing, leaving a lot of the details out, is that there isn't almost literally infinite amount of details. We as humans would like everything to be black and white. That's easier for us, and a lot of people don't make the effort to actually delve deep into matters. And you do have to delve deep. There are, at this point, probably thousands of books about this conflict, and people just operate the way they operate, which is, I saw a Twitter thread on the thing, so that's it.
I mean, in college, I took a course by an Israeli professor who was a very middle ground mindset, similar to yours, and
Mm.
he described the Israel-Palestine conflict as best as he could,
Hmm.
but ended the class explaining that, listen, it's complicated. He said that there's no such thing as an authority on the subject because no one fully understands the story. Do you think that's true?
From what I understand, it's true. Like, I had the privilege of being on the ground with people who have been part of the Shabak, like the Israeli intelligence forces who operate in the West Bank and Gaza, people from elite forces, people from the intelligence branch of the army. I even took a private tour of just me and a traveler of mine alone with the person who was in charge of laying down the blueprint for the obstacle between Israel and the West Bank in and around the Jerusalem area. These people, I noticed a tendency that the more knowledgeable a person is, the less certain they are about a possible future solution to the conflict here. Okay.
That's fascinating. So normally when we get more information about a problem that needs fixing, we normally feel
Mhm.
more confident about fixing the problem. Like, for example, right? Let's say my door broke and I had to fix the door. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go on YouTube and I'm going to subscribe to Bad Jew. No, I'm kidding. I'm going to go look up how to fix that door, right? That's the first thing I would do. And then I would copy exactly what the contractor who made the video described and how to fix that door, right? But Israel is opposite, where it's so complicated that the more and more and more you learn about the conflict, the less confident people become about fixing the solution.
Right. So if we were to actually frame what happens when you learn about this subject here, it turns out that it's not that you know what the problem is and now you're researching the solution. It's you're researching the problem and then you realize how convoluted it is and how complicated it is. And this is really it. But it's actually the solution
Yeah.
that is, in theory, not in any real way, in theory, is simple, which is, you want people to get to know one another. You want to appreciate the humanity in individuals that are, on paper, from the other side, right? And then be surprised by how human they are and get to know them
Mhm.
in very human situations, like a soccer match or whatever, right? which is also part of the, but this adds to the problem. Like the trend has been one of actually disengaging in the last 20 years, since the second intifada, maybe around that time. If in the 90s we were very, very close to a peace treaty, there was supposed to be a sovereign Palestinian state in 1999. The Oslo Accords set us on this path. And because of the work of some dedicated extremists, that fell apart. And within a few years, measures were taken that actually put more and more buffers that allow for less and less interaction between humans, which is the simple, theoretically simple solution to this. So trust is at an all-time low, and we don't see it coming back. So the problem is just getting bigger, not smaller.
Yeah. And speaking of trends, I have some statistics I want to pull up, but before I even pull up those statistics, if you look at the current events happening in Israel right now, this has an impact right now on how we as a Jewish nation around the world are going to respond to that. So that right now, for those who don't know, Netanyahu teamed up with an extremist party that was originally banned from the Knesset, which is the Israeli government, in order to regain power. So after having been, beat from an election, he was able to get right back into power as prime minister. And right now there are incredible protests that are happening that are ending, unfortunately, very violently. And you have the Israeli government concerned about the future of their democracy, which makes it harder for us as non-Israeli Jews to defend Israel. When someone who is supporting BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions, when someone is speaking about, free Palestine, when they say that nasty shit to you, and I'm just going to say it like that because that's what it is, it really does make it harder to defend Israel. And so right now, our country, as a government, not as the culture, not as the religious significance, but speaking specifically about the government itself, is muddying the waters of what Israel is. And that's really, really difficult. So here are some statistics that were taken last year. This is before Netanyahu regained his recent power. Just pulling this up here, that this is how the United States Jews feel. Are we emotionally attached? And the answer is yes, we are. 58% say somewhat, 25% say very, depending on also the sect of Judaism as well. So you have Orthodox Judaism say 82% say yes, they're very. 78% say of conservative Jews say that they are very attached to Israel, and 58% say that they are. 58% of Reformed Jews say that they're connected. And it's one thing that's interesting as well is that it doesn't matter what the denomination. 58% of men and 58% of women believe that they're attached to Israel. It also shows differentiations in age as well, where the younger you are, you're kind of like not as attached, but as you get older and older and older, by 65 years old, you're over 67%. 67% of the people that are over 65 believe they're attached to Israel. So that speaks to the fact that it really is about building a relationship with the country, that it takes time to build a relationship. I think that's really fascinating. Also shows breakdown of Jewish people from high school age all the way to postgraduate degree. Also, this next part's really fascinating when it comes to American Jews is your political beliefs. If you're Republican, you're in the 72% of people that are attached to Israel. And if you're Democrat, you're 52% attached to 52% of Democrats are attached to Israel. And this last part is the most key part. This is why birthright exists. This is an argument for birthright to exist. Is if you've never been to Israel, only 41% of those people believe in their attachment to Israel. But if you've been more than once to Israel, 90% of the people who have been more than once feel attached to the land of Israel. So that is incredibly fascinating. This next part here from Pew Research is that 1 in 10 U.S. Jews support the BDS movement, while 43% oppose it and 43% haven't heard much about it. So I think that's fascinating. A slim majority of U.S. Jews, including 6 in 10 Jews by religion and 42% of Jews of no religion, say they have heard either some or a lot about the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. Nearly 1 in 10 Orthodox Jews and 7 in 10 conservative Jews say they have heard at least something about the movement, as have 54% Reform Jews. So I find that fascinating. It almost seems like the Orthodox Jews are detached from the movement, but then conservative Jews a little bit more, and then Reform Jews are the most aware of that movement, which is fascinating. And then that Jews, the highest levels of education, are more likely than others to have heard something about BDS. Now, my personal opinion on that last part, that I think is really fascinating. I went to San Francisco State. Eyal, I don't know if you know this or not, but part of the closest thing I have to a claim to fame is the fact that there is a lawsuit with my name on it called Volk versus CSU Board of Trustees. And I talk about it in the very first episode of my podcast, and how it was my personal victory for anti-Semitism, where I sued my college, San Francisco State, for systemic anti-Semitism, things that happen behind closed doors. There's a longer story to it that I can go into another time. But the bottom line is that, I personally experienced at least a version of BDS. It wasn't officially BDS. There is an organization for BDS.
Mm-hmm.
Our college campus did not have it at that time. And when I had experienced it, the one thing I was observing from people who were in, the college campus square chanting with the General Union of Palestinian Students is that these were just regular organizations. You had like the LGBTQA organization that was there. You had the I think it was the Union of African American Students that was there. You had organizations that really had nothing to do with the General Union of Palestinian Students. And I think that speaks to two things. I think the first thing is that General Union of Palestinian Students and other organizations like that do a really good job at playing victim. Jews as well, by the way, are accused of playing victim all the time. We're told to get over it more and more and more, kind of referencing the Holocaust. And then we get told all the time, wow, you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain, and accuse Jews of becoming the new Nazis, which is beyond measure. It's extreme. Mm-hmm. If you looked at only one side, yeah, I too could believe in that. But that's where we're left, is that, again, the situation is too complicated. There's blood on both sides. It's so confusing that you can't possibly have pointed to one person and said they're Nazis. Mm-hmm. There is no ethnic cleansing happening in Israel. It's just not. No. The population of Palestinians has grown to over, is it 2 million or 2 billion now? It's 2 million.
Yeah, it's about 20% of the country. So it's 2 million, and then probably over 3 million in the West Bank, and then about 3 million in Gaza, which is a very dense population. And, I have kind of a funny way of addressing the genocide claim, at least. If Israel is committing a genocide, it's by far the least competent country or nation to ever do so, right? I mean, what is the plan there? Usually you're supposed to show some sort of actions that go towards it, and you don't. Yeah, basically Israel sucks at genocide, even if that's which it isn't. But so if anybody thinks,
so I don't think either side has the ability to just wave a victim card and say, I'm purely the victim here, right?
No, so I mean it's also lame, right? I mean, as per the Arab League and Palestinian leadership, there is there's a serious issue with victimhood, and basically, a lot of the Palestinian refugees from the War of 48, and here I'm gonna say the War of 48. Okay, so I'm not gonna call it independence or the Nakba or anything like that, but there was a war in 47, 48, and Palestinian refugees did leave their homes. I live in a kibbutz that was founded in 1939. My kibbutz is called Dalia, and the Arab village that coexisted here for 9 years until 48 was called Daliat el Carmel. So you can even see the kind of respect that the kibbutzniks paid to this village by not going and picking any name, but taking the name of an already existing village, and coexistence with them was at times tense and was at other times very good, with exchanges of visits and so on. I was going to say that a lot of Palestinian refugees who ended up beyond the borders of what is now Palestine and Israel, let's say in Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, a lot of them have not gained local citizenship in the new countries they ended up with, because the official position is the Jews are going to fix it, not this other country. Now, this is very interesting to note that, according to the Arab League and the kind of academic work on what it means to be an Arab, we have the idea of Al Ummah, right, which is this big Arab nation without borders of all the Arabs. And it's also worth mentioning who is an Arab according to the Arab League. An Arab is somebody whose native tongue or is standard Arabic, right? So obviously we can't expect a Moroccan to understand an Iraqi when they talk to one another, but they both listen to the news that uses modern Arabic. But it also says that this person has to be sympathetic with the goals of of the the Arab nations. Okay, so this leaves in Christians and Muslims, but definitely makes sure that no Jews fit the bill, right?
Oh,
Because
good.
if there are Moroccan Jews, why are they not Arabs? They grew up on hearing that language and whatnot. So there's definitely a strong tendency from the early days of blaming the Jewish enterprise of Zionism for problems. And, I like to contrast it with the Jewish attitude towards Jews who have just come from either Europe post World War II or North Africa, when these countries actually banished Jew by law, in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Well, the country of Israel immediately gave them citizenship and housed them, and the population of the country more than doubled itself. And this meant that the young country of Israel had to enact austerity measures in the beginning. Okay, now we see Israel as this really rich country and all that. This was not the case, and it actually took on a huge challenge of inviting all these Jews over and making them citizens, despite the fact that the people who were already here had to go on austerity measures and have rations of bread allocated to them, right?
So this is
Yeah,
like basically a
so
third world country at this point when Israel was founded. That's what you're saying.
the advantage that Israel and the would-be Israel, like up to 48, enjoyed is that these people did come from Europe with a very high education. So the people were very educated. So in that sense, it was never a third world country, because the education here was not third world education. This is also, I think, when Jews and Arabs, and again, this is Muslim plus Christian. Okay, so some people think this is along a religious divide. No, Muslims and Christians are together in this as Arabs, as Palestinians. In the beginning, the Jews don't have a lot more than the locals, but over time, from the early 1900s and so on, leading up to 48, you have the Jewish side forming institutions that would immediately become ministries as soon as there's a country, right? While the Arab way of life here was just very kind of decentralized, poor farmers living wherever with just a few educated people, probably living in Jerusalem, Jaffa, and Nazareth, places like this. And that made the difference also, because at the start of the War of Independence, there are twice as many Arabs here, but plus add the four plus armies that invade day old Israel, but they lose eventually because the Jews were very organized from the beginning and knew what they wanted, and they knew how to get it. So they formed a would-be army, they formed a would-be finance ministry, they formed everything, a would-be government, everything.
Yeah. it's inspirational when you think about it from that perspective. From the other perspective, the losing side in this case, the War of 48, which I'm, by the way, I'm not quite sure why it wouldn't be the War of Independence or the Nakba. May I ask why you didn't go by those terminologies?
Yeah, so Nakba literally means disaster. That's what the
That's
Palestinians call
right.
this war, because
Mhm,
it was a disaster. A
mhm.
lot of refugees. Israel is actually has expanded its borders in comparison with the UN proposal, which would have given it a lot less land.
That's
So
right.
it's a disaster. And then for Israel, it's the war of independence for obvious reasons. There comes at the end of it, there's an independent Israel that would go on to live to this day, despite some of its neighbors trying to destroy it in the coming years. But I'm saying 48 because this is a fact. There was a war, and I don't like to step on the kind of mines that people like to lay on you and just have a big long discussion about, oh, why are you calling this, you can call this, right? So
Right.
it's like sometimes you just want to say bovid instead of cow, right? And it's still correct. to to
Yeah,
keep the discussion focused on
sure.
what you want to focus on.
Well, I really do respect that. I think that that's a nice, middle ground way of looking at it. This is, one thing I want to point out to our listeners is that Eyal, as a tour guide, knows far more than what he has introduced on the show. And for the same, no, 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 it's true because on your tours, you go in depth about all the different locations that you take your people to, that you take your clients to. You're caring for them and you're introducing them to these new concepts, and you help them leave realizing that they're still a student, that you're very much a student too, and you're just giving them a piece of your book report that you've been doing all these years, right? Metaphorically speaking. So
Yeah.
with that idea in mind, you are in this place where you're helping us understand that it's not necessary. You can't to subscribe to the War of Independence is to completely side with one side. To subscribe to the Nakba is to subscribe to the other side. And so the more you learn, the more you realize that the only factual thing that we can point to is this middle ground of yes, there was a war in 48 and these things happened. These events took place. Without getting emotionally, politically attached, the only thing we can do is relate to the intellectual attachment in this situation because A, it's the past, B, we can't change the past, and C, it's the only thing that is concrete in facts. And that's really what makes the wars and the conflicts and the constant game of cat and mouse, this very violent, bloody game of cat and mouse, take place. One last thing I want to pull up here as well is that, no subgroups of US Jews express more support for BDS than opposition to it, but the ratio of opposition to support for the BDS movement is much more lopsided amongst Jewish Republicans, 58% opposed versus 3% supportive, than among Jewish Democrats, 39% opposed, 13% support. It is also greater among Jews aged 65 and older, 52% opposed versus 7% supportive, than among Jews 18 to 29, 34% opposed versus 13% supportive. I bring up that quote now to remind people that no matter what political side you are here in America, Israel is different because this is a relationship that if you really want to learn about the confusing relationship between Israel and Palestine, you have to understand that you have to go about it the way you would a relationship. And I'm sure
Mm.
right now you could think in your head to someone in your life that you have a very complicated relationship with. If you feel the need as a young American to stand behind a movement, to go, oh, rah, 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 on this one subject, right? You need to look at both sides of it and approach it like a relationship. If you approach it like a relationship, you too will be able to realize that no one here is an authority. We're all students learning about it. We're all trying to figure it out. And we're all trying to embrace this amazing, beautiful side to us that happens to have geography attached to it.
Mhm.
Anything else you want to add, Eyal?
Yeah, I wanna say before we part ways, talk about the fact that I like diversity, and you mentioned the political turmoil that's going here now. It's actually very good. Some people look at it like Hassan Nasrallah, the chief secretary of Hezbollah or something. He's saying that, oh, here's Israel society falling apart or something like that. Can't be farther from the truth. The truth is that the moment we have a prime minister and a few other with his unholy alliance with people he does not like. Okay, if people think Bibi likes any of his political partners, he does not, but he wants to stay out of jail, and he has his finance minister Deri who wants to stay out of jail. And what happened here is that Israelis recognize that right now laws are passed that have nothing to do with them. They are personal laws, okay? And immediately we didn't wait 2-3 years to take out to the streets. This was immediately recognized and protested against. And I also want to tie to the BDS thing, because I think that some people truly care about Israel, and though you and I might think that they're misguided, they think that the best way to treat Israel is with this kind of treatment of boycott, divest, and sanction. Um, okay, it's good to have a diversity of opinions, okay, and free speech is always going to be good, and it's good that these people um, get to talk. This is good. Israel, for example, for large part, and there's so much we haven't discussed, and I'm gonna finish with something, but I wanted to end on the note that one thing that's when it comes to this relationship is that the biggest, most elaborate, and most successful kind of political flip flopping ever is the European superpowers actually getting away with all the shit that they did, And if you look at here, it's like something we can, I think, if we look at the facts, all agree on is that if we actually want to play the victim, we are the victims of the Brits and the French, but ultimately it's not about that, right? And we could find common ground there, but I think the message I want to send listeners away with is that we need to be forward looking. That's it. It's like the past is the past. Sane people who look for the humanity in other people should be forward looking, and they should be very, very vocal about their unwillingness to kind of wade forever in this bog of like who did what first, because this literally goes thousands of years back, and that's not where you're going to find the solutions. And I'm going to make a bold claim that within 20 years this conflict will in fact be over.
You think in 20 years, the Israel-Palestine conflict, which has been
Yeah, I
around
think
since as old as even before Israel's existence,
I think
it's
it's
going to be
I
over
think
in
it's
20 years.
I think it's very probable. I'm giving you 20 years because in 20 years nobody's going to look this podcast up, but it's very possible. Let's see what happens after the ground is made ready for a formal peace agreement with Saudi Arabia. Let's see, because the Arab League will then won't have really a reason for its existence without the Palestinian problem. If most superpowers, Arab superpowers around us, recognize Israel formally, as do Jordan and Egypt already, and Bahrain and UAE and Morocco and Sudan, when the rest of them join, the Palestinians are actually, I kind of feel bad for them, but they're going to feel like they've been played as pawns by other more powerful people, which is true. But after that, there's going to follow. They're going to follow all sorts of um, guarantees in place that guarantee the safety of Israel, and this might allow Israel to formally withdraw from the West Bank um, and reserve the right, obviously, to retaliate should anything happens. But it could resolve the sovereignty issue, which is the heart of this: the fact that Israel occupies these territories and it's no man's land, and that's problematic both for Israelis and definitely for Palestinians there.
Wow. Wow. Well, I think you've given all of us something to think about when it comes to this.
Yeah,
I think it's
hopefully.
You made a bold claim, but I want that to happen. I want there to be peace. And if the price is 20 years, I would take it in a heartbeat. And, I do know that the Arab nations around Israel are becoming more and more, they are building deeper relationships. In fact, that college professor I mentioned that, taught the Israel-Palestine conflict, part of the final that we took in this class was to kind of do a mock trial where we all had to act as the ambassadors for certain countries and respond the way that those countries would respond to certain scenarios. I thought it was a very fascinating practice. My group was like was responsible for Jordan, and our teacher kind of helped explain Jordan's position on it. But then you have other surrounding countries like Egypt. You had people who represented the West Bank there. You had people who represented, Israel, and you had people who represented all the countries around, Syria around there, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, even more, So it was a really fascinating conversation. It all ties together in this really amazing way. So, Eyal, I want to thank you for being on this podcast. Should someone want to reach out to you and connect with you, continue this argument, continue debating with you, what's the best way they can reach out?
Yeah, so I have my Substack, which is my name, eyalshay.substack.com. And on there, you can find my podcast, which deals with completely different things and looks for the humanity, really just a humanistic kind of philosophical podcast, but really keeps things grounded. And so it's actually talking with people about ideas that help them live well. I occasionally write on there. And then, of course, yeah, you have my email running here at the bottom of the screen. So that's if you want to come to Israel, say hi, be guided, then you're more than welcome to.
Awesome. All that information will be displayed in the show notes of this episode. Eyal, thank you for being on this podcast. You're awesome. I really love your very humble way of looking at the conflict, and I can't wait to learn more from you as time goes on. Thank you, Eyal.
Thank you. Thank you, Chaz. Thank you.
Shalom.